Welcome back to our Fair Chance conversation series. I'm Alex Love with Level Set and Alex Love Consulting.
And I'm Matt Joyce with Level Set and Envoy.
And today we're going to be talking about a topic that is both complex and confusing, but ever present in our work. And that's employer liability and negligent hiring.
And we'll start where every conversation starts on this topic with a whole bunch of disclaimers. This is not legal advice. We have not cracked the code on negligent hiring law by any means, but it's an area that we're always trying to educate ourselves in. And we've had the good fortune this summer to bring on a researcher, May Fullerton, to dig into precedent and policy and regulations and just help bring a little bit of perspective to this topic. So May, welcome.
Thanks for having me.
So May, let's sort of start at the beginning of your research and your process. Would love to hear just, what you looked at to try to unpack and understand negligent hiring law.
Yeah, so I looked at a lot of secondary and primary sources. I first started with what sort of guidance is provided for employment attorneys. I also read a lot of academic articles and practical guidance published by organizations like NELP, the ACLU, SHRM, et cetera. I also read a lot of case law. So I looked at a lot of landmark cases and ordinary negligent hiring cases across all states.
That's great. It sounds like a lot of reading. So frequently we use the EEOC guidance as the foundation for talking to employers about liability. And the EEOC guidance really centers on the individualized review of candidates and determining whether their conviction is likely to affect job performance. But it seems like from your research, there's a lot more for us to think about before even assessing candidates. Can you tell us a little bit about what you learned about the other factors that affect negligent hiring liability?
Yeah, so all the guidance really emphasized how important it is for employers to consider the role and the position that they're trying to fill. So positions that have more risk associated with them or might be a little bit more sensitive in nature. So for example, positions that have a high risk of injury or involve operating heavy machinery, engaging with vulnerable populations, accessing people's homes, handling personal finances, et cetera. Those all might require a greater duty of care and therefore a more rigorous background investigation. A lot of EEOC guidance also echoes what concrete steps that employers can take to minimize their negligent hiring liability. So for example, considering how relevant a past offense is to the nature of the job is really important, both for complying with EEOC guidelines, but also for reducing that negligent hiring risk. So for example, if you're trying to hire someone to fill a trucking position, a DUI might be more relevant of an offense to that job compared to, for example, credit card fraud. Whereas if they're considering filling a position that requires handling sensitive personal financial information, past crimes involving things like fraud or stealing might be a little bit more relevant to that than a DUI. They should also weigh, I should also say, they should weigh the relevance of the past crime to the offense or the past offense to the position with evidence of rehabilitation and other factors like time since conviction, the age of the applicant, et cetera.
Yeah, I think on that note, it's so important to flag that there's a whole process that can take place before a background check is even conducted, right? Before you start to look at the individual candidate and their sort of readiness and qualification for the job, just understanding your own positions as an employer, the risk of those positions, the geography that you're in, sort of the industry that you're in. And I think it's helpful to just understand that that the assessment really goes as much to the job itself as to the candidate, and a really helpful lens to bring into the conversation. So you've reviewed an awful lot of cases, very specific cases that may tell a broader story to employers. But I'm curious, from all of the reading that you've done, especially with sort of the recent history of negligent hiring, what should employers know about what actions sort of might affect their liability and their risk?
Yeah, so the one thing that employers should really keep in mind is that negligent hiring law is rooted in common law. So it varies by jurisdiction. and it's rooted in precedent. So how Ohio might apply the standards of negligent hiring could vary a lot compared to how Arizona might apply those standards. To compound this complexity, the mechanisms and like the different methodologies that courts use to establish important standards of negligent hiring law, so like the foreseeability that a crime is recommitted, those can also vary by court. So there's a lot of variation, a lot of inconsistencies. For viewers that are interested, I suggest they check out Stacey Hickox's work. She's a professor at Michigan State who specializes in employment law, and she's done some really helpful work documenting these inconsistencies and articulating them for employers. But fortunately, being more inclusive doesn't mean that you have to relinquish your risk management. There's concrete steps that you can take as an employer to mitigate your risk of negligent hiring. And that's a lot of what we've covered so far, but specifically assessing the risk of the position or the role, scaling the extent of your background check accordingly. Some positions might not necessarily even require a background check. It all varies, and you should really consult with your legal counsel for setting kind of those standards. Also considering things like industry benchmarks, local regulations, and again, weighing the nature of the crime with the past offense, with all possible evidence of rehabilitation and re-engagement efforts is really important.
Wow, it sounds like a lot of kind of nuance and different things depending on which state we're in. We encourage employers to recognize that conviction history is only part of a much broader analysis that includes context and circumstances, evidence of re-engagement in the community, and readiness to successfully rejoin the workforce. Through your research, May, how did you see employers weighing other contextual factors into that assessment?
Yeah, fortunately, there's a lot you can take into account when trying to assess whether an applicant has really made efforts to re-engage with their community. These can range from a lot of different things. So some states offer what are called restoration of rights certificates. These are otherwise referred to as certificate of employability in some states, certificate of relief, et cetera. And they all vary a little bit. But the general idea is if you have an applicant that has one of these and can offer them, you're pretty good to go on negligent hiring liability. Employers generally cannot be sued for negligent hiring liability if they hire an applicant who's able to provide a certificate like that. However, these can also be few and far between because they're complicated to apply for. They need to be issued by a court, et cetera. So other factors that you can look for is education. Did they take a program while in prison or afterwards? How long ago was the most recent conviction? You should make an effort to get references from past employers if possible, or job training programs, case managers, et cetera. Any other evidence of participating in things like counseling or social services program, work release, even firefighting or other types of community service can be really helpful. And all those things should be documented because being able to show that you've really taken a holistic approach to considering the whole applicant is really key.
Thank you for that, May. This is just so much to take in and really consider. I think one of the biggest things for me, if I was an employer listening to all of this, is really that it depends on where we are, what the industry is, and kind of all of this other context as it relates specifically to the employer, what those positions are that they're hiring. And it sounds like a lot of that really needs like legal counsel specifically for that employer. I'm so glad that you were able to bring some of these things up and we were able to talk about it, because I think it's really important for folks to really understand some of the nuance and really the root of negligent hiring and kind of understanding some of these cases. So thank you so much, May, for chatting with us. And until next time.
Thanks for having me.